I'm Miss Appleby, and I had just moved to Georgia right before 9/11, a month or two earlier. I had a baby and a toddler, and my husband happened to be home that morning, and I happened to turn on the TV, which I never, ever did. But it was just as it was taking place, and I couldn't believe it, and I ran into the other room and called my husband in. That night, I went to a church activity, and there was a sign on the church that said it had been canceled. And the next day, I went to the mall, and it was like a ghost town. Everybody stayed home, and it was very memorable.
I'm Miss Layson. On September 11th, when the towers were attacked, I was teaching my 5th grade class. We were at lunch. The lunch person had the TV on, and all my children were going through the lunch line, and they didn't know what was going on. When we got back to the classroom, I told them that the United States had been attacked. And we turned on our TV when we got back to the classroom, and we discussed what was going on. They were very afraid, but I told them that everything would be fine. And that afternoon, we dismissed school. Parents came to get their children, and we prayed when we got back to the classroom for everything that happened that day.
My name's Miss Barfield, and on 9/11 I was in Jones County. I was teaching 2nd grade, and I had 22 students that year. I remember the assistant principal coming in, and she went into each individual. I guess all the administration went in individually to each classroom and told us what was going on, and to not turn our TVs on because they were showing pictures of people jumping out of buildings, and what was just actually going on, and it could be very terrifying to the children. It was terrifying to me, although I didn't have children of my own yet. I was a little nervous. Our school in our little small town had never gone under lockdown before, so it was just a different feeling that I'd never felt before. And I felt like the mom mode kicked in, and having to protect my children and not knowing what was going to happen next.
This is Miss Thompson, and on September 11th, I remember I was 15 years old, and I was in the 10th grade. When it happened, I was in my health occupations class, and I didn't know about it until I went to my homeroom advisement, and my teacher, Mr. Moore, had the TV on, and we actually saw the second plane go into the building. And we just kind of were pretty, somber throughout the rest of the day, and I, being 15 years old, didn't really realize how big a deal it was. And when I got home, I remember getting off the bus thinking I was going to tell my parents something that they didn't already know. But turns out my mom, who worked downtown in a high-rise building in Macon, they sent her home because they just had no idea if any other tall buildings were going to be attacked. I know the football game that week was canceled at school. When I was at home, we were watching the news, and as we were watching the news, I remember seeing people jump out of the buildings and how terrifying that was. And another story that I remember is we had a friend that actually lived in New York at the time, and when the building came crashing down, she said she just ran and ran and ran, and by the time she looked up, she had gone 4 miles. And that's what I remember about September 11th.
Hi, my name is Miss Lynch. On September 11th, I was a freshman in college at Western Michigan University. I remember my residential advisor came and knocked on our door, told us all to turn on our TVs, and I just remember sitting in front of the TV and watching that second plane crash into that second tower, and we all had our doors open at the same time, and you could just collectively hear people reacting, gasping, crying. It was terrifying. And I remember that night we held a candlelight vigil outside the school, and the only thing we could do that night was pray for our country.
Hi, this is Dr. Bennett. Hi. On 9/11, I was a freshman in college at Mercer, and I found out when I was in my calculus class the teacher was late. We almost left, and then he brought the assignment at the last second before everyone left. He said that planes flew into the building, and he walked out. We had no idea what was going on. We finished our work. Near the end, he had said the first or second building fell, and then he left again, and we all just didn't know what was going on, and then I went to my next class, did that, and then after that they had canceled classes, but my classes were already done. And that's when I found out about 9/11.
My name is Heather Church, and I was in the 6th grade at middle school, and I was leaving gym, and some other students were telling me what was going on. I didn't quite understand. I thought maybe it was something that they had like learned in history or something, and it wasn't until I went into my next class when my teacher was crying and she turned on the news, and we then were able to see everything that was going on, and I was frightened and confused, and I just wanted to go home.
My name is Dawn McDavid, and I was working at Auburn University at the time, and I was in my office, and someone was running down the hall saying they bombed something, and we didn't know what was going on, so we went to a TV, and we turned it on, and we were all there watching it over and over and over again, and then we were still in there when the second one hit, and I knew that we all just gasped, and we were just so scared, and we didn't know if there was going to be more anywhere else in the world. And then they kept talking about everything in the Pentagon and the other one that went down, and it was just really scary, I think, to not know what was coming next.
My name is Mr. Lyon, and on 9/11/2001, I was in the 5th grade, and I was the same age as my students, and I remember I was sitting in the back of the classroom. They wheeled a TV in on a cart, and they said, "You guys need to watch this," and I didn't really understand what was going on at the time, but I didn't think that far ahead.
My name is Linda Brown, and I was here on this campus 18 years ago. Matter of fact, I was team teaching with Miss Nell Walters, and we had taken our classes to the greenhouse, and there was a campus-wide announcement not to turn on your TV for any reason, not to answer your phone for any reason. And we thought, the computers were down, that satellite was down, so we all, of course, complied with that. And then when we returned to our classroom, Miss Queenie Brost, our supervisor principal, came and said, "Where have you been? You should have stayed in your room." And I said, "Why? We were following our schedule." And she said, "Stay with your students at all times, have an adult with them at all times, close your curtains, close your door, and don't leave." So we pulled her out in the hall. We said, "Queenie, what's happened?" She said, "America is under attack." And we were all shocked. And one by one, the supervisors would walk around the building and let a teacher walk to the office and look at the TV. But none of our students knew about this. We all bonded together to protect our students. And it truly is hard to believe it's been 18 years.
My name is Cindy Alligood, and on September 11th, I was teaching at a middle school in Wilkinson County, and one of my coworkers came in and said that a plane had hit one of the buildings and that we were under attack. And I remember the first thing that came to my mind was, even though I knew right where my child was and she was not very far from me, was, where's my child? And then it just kind of all started, sinking in. At first, when I first heard it, it was like, what in the world? And then the more you thought about it, and then it happened again, and it just was very, very, very frightening experience.
I'm Greg Hudgens, and on September 11th, 2001, I was on my way to work. I worked here, and I was Miss Alligood at the time. I was a PE teacher, and I worked a 9 to 5 schedule, and on the way here, I was on Forest Hill Drive, and I heard that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And then when I got here, I came into the office, the part where Miss Shirley's office is, and there was a TV in there. And shortly after I got here, I saw the footage of a second plane hitting the tower. And it was a very awful feeling to think about that and all the lives that were lost. And our school, went on that day, and we were on lockdown here at GAB that day, and just a lot of emotion. So.
My name is Amy Bardash, and I was teaching here at GAB on September 11th. I was teaching middle grades, And a coworker, Mr. Tankard, told me what had happened, and I turned on my TV on silent so the students couldn't hear it. And the first thing I thought was, what a horrible accident. I cannot believe that something like that happened and it was just a horrible accident. And then I witnessed the second plane hit, and then you realized it was something more than an accident. And like others, I immediately thought about my children, and they were in Warner Robins at my parents', and I'm thinking about the base and the base being under attack, so I'm worried about my children, but we have to stay here and protect the students here because we were on lockdown. My godfather worked in the city, and so I knew that he was in the city, and nobody was able to contact him, but he ended up being okay. And we had an administrator here whose brother was also in the city, and she couldn't contact him, but he ended up being okay also, so we were very blessed in that respect. But I do remember thinking of how it kind of hit close to home in the sense that we live near a military town, and that it is a big base, and that they could easily be a target, which could definitely affect us even closer.
I'm Dawn Day, and on 9/11, I was at a high school in Lawrence County in Dublin. And when the plane hit, our principal came by and said we could turn on the TV and turn it on, and like everybody else, I thought it was an accident. Well, as the time went on, then another plane hit, and we realized that we were under attack. And a teacher next door to me came over, and I watched her class because she was going to call her sister who worked in one of the Twin Towers. And when she called her, she had stayed home sick that day, so that was a blessing. And then I called to make sure my children were okay, and then I tried to call my mother who worked at Robins Air Force Base. And when I could not get through, I started getting worried, a little upset, and then just started trying to keep myself busy for the rest of the day. And I talked to my husband and made sure that other family members were okay, and then just, tried to keep the day as normal as I could for my students, but with the whole time thinking of, what was going to happen, because at that time it just seemed like we didn't know what was going to happen. And since then, things have changed, and that's why security at the airport and everything is like the way it is now. But that's where I was on 9/11.
My name is Gene Collins, and on September the 11th, 2001, I had not yet become a teacher, so I was working at a printing company out close to the Air Force Base in Warner Robins. And we didn't have TVs where we were working, but there was some limited access to computers, and some folks had started to get reports over the news about planes hitting the World Trade Center. And shortly after that, I was able to go to my parents' house, who lived pretty close to Warner Robins, and I was able to see some of the footage of the buildings coming down. And I just remember getting angry about having to see that and seeing all the people being so scared. And then I thought about my daughter, who was in kindergarten at a school that was actually very close to the Air Force Base and right across the street from an airport. So planes were flying over their school all the time. So we made sure that she was safe, and she was. My mom picked her up, and it was just a time of great uncertainty because we never knew what was happening or what was going to be next. And I do remember how eerie it was to look up and see no airplanes in the sky. And when you finally saw that first one, your first thought was, where was it going? So it did change the way we perceive the world forever.
My name is Rhoda Creech. I was home the morning of 9/11, but I was going to substitute at a school midway through the day. So I was watching the TV, and when the first plane hit the tower, it was very concerning. But, things happened and nobody really understood exactly what was going on. But then in real time, as we watched, and a few minutes later, the second plane hit the tower, we knew that was no accident. And things got very sober very quickly. So I went on to the school where I was going to sub, and word hadn't really gotten out there. So the teacher I was going to sub for didn't even know, and she kind of brushed it off like, oh, something happened in New York. It always happens in New York. But I tried to tell her, no, this is big, this is serious. And of course it did turn out to be. But I remember at the end of the day, the principal came over the intercom and assured all the children somebody had done something really terrible in New York a long way away, but they were safe, and they were going to be safe. And no matter what they heard on the TV that was scary, they were still going to be safe. And I appreciated that she did that for those children. I remember the newscasters were saying, now this is the Pearl Harbor of our generation. And when I heard that, I thought, no, it's just not that. It couldn't be that monumental. But by the end of the day, it was obvious, yes, it was. And truly, it was the Pearl Harbor of our generation. So that is my 9/11 experience.
My name is Allison Hawkins, and on September 11th, I was walking to class. I was a freshman at University of Georgia, and I was walking down Baxter Avenue from my dorm. And when I got to class, I believe it was the 9 o'clock class, there was a sign posted on the door that we were not having class, but I still didn't know what was going on. So then I started getting calls from my parents, and I remember it just being a very scary time.
My name is Mrs. Jones, and I was right here at GAB on 9/11. My class and I were in the music room. That was when Chris Davis was the music teacher, and we were having a music lesson when suddenly we heard over the intercom that it was a lockdown and that we were to turn on the TV, and that was when we heard about what was happening.
My name is Angela Touchton. I'm a teacher here at the Academy, and I was right here in what is now Mr. Collins' room on 9/11, 2001. I remember having a student in my classroom at the time who was Muslim. He was an exchange student from Egypt, and when it was announced that it was probably a terrorist attack, I just remember turning and seeing him in tears. He was devastated. He kept saying, they're all going to hate me now. And he was so afraid. And the other part of this for me personally is that I had a friend who worked in the Pentagon, and it was 12 hours before I knew she was still alive. That's where I was on 9/11.
Hi, my name is Tyrene Neal, and on September 11th, 2001, I was teaching at a middle school in Warner Robins, Georgia, and I was walking through the classroom and the television was already on, and we heard report of the first plane hitting a building. And I was in a hurry and busying about the day, and honestly, I rolled my eyes and I thought, what idiot couldn't see that big, large building, and why on earth, with today's technology, did a plane hit the building? How on earth could that have happened? Because I couldn't imagine any other thing. And then shortly thereafter, the second plane hit. And we were glued to the TV all day long watching the tragedy, and just the tears were falling, and people were worried about their family members. Robins Air Force Base is in Warner Robins, and it was shut down, and lots of people and families worked there, so it was very tense. And now, since that day, there isn't a single tragedy that happens that I don't think first, is this another attack? And so that's kind of the day that the world changed.